Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into a world that smells faintly of cold stone and candle wax, where the air is thick with the echo of distant chanting and the scratch of quills on parchment. You're not just visiting, you're about to become a child in a medieval convent. The cloister gates creak shut behind you, and that's it. No going back to your warm little bed at home, no running through the fields in the morning sun. You're here now, locked into a life that isn't entirely yours, in a place where the rules are older than memory. And trust me, you probably won't survive this without a shiver or two. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the sound. Convents in the Middle Ages weren't silent, but they carried a kind of constant hush, broken only by the toll of a bell, the faint murmur of a psalm, or the hard clang of a bucket against the well's edge. You feel small, swallowed by the heavy stone walls. The nuns glide past their habits, brushing the floor in a rhythm that feels ancient and deliberate. You're not here for a quick visit. You're here because your family has decided this is your path, whether you agree or not. Maybe you were the third daughter in a wealthy family with no marriage prospects, or maybe your parents couldn't afford to feed you. Either way, the convent is now your home, and its rules will become your heartbeat. Your day starts in darkness. Before the first pale hint of dawn stains the sky, the night bell calls you from your narrow cot. The dormitory smells of straw mattresses and the damp chill that never quite leaves these walls. You rub your eyes and pull your woolen habit tighter against your body. There's no time for the luxury of a slow wake-up. You shuffle into line with the others, bare feet on icy stone toward the chapel. Here, your first act of the day is prayer, long drawn-out chanting that seems to stretch the minutes into hours. For a child, it's a strange kind of torture. The body wants to curl back under the covers, but the voice must rise in the psalms, soft and steady. The convent's chapel is lit by trembling candle flames. The air is smoky, tinged with incense and the faint waxy sweetness of burning tapers. As your eyes adjust, you watch the older sisters moving with a solemnity you barely understand. Each bow, each genuflection is precise, and you learn quickly that mistakes are noticed. The mistress of novices, your stern overseer, stands like a shadow in the corner, her gaze sharp enough to cut through the dimness. She will correct you with a whisper that somehow carries more sting than a shout. After the morning offices, you file into the refectory for the simplest of breakfasts, maybe coarse bread, sometimes dipped in weak ale or a thin porridge made from barley or oats. The nuns eat in silence while one sister reads aloud from the Rule of Saint Benedict or the Lives of Saints. The words wash over you, half understood, half ignored, but you know better than to fidget. A single dropped crust could bring a glare from the mistress, or worse, a small penance. By the time the sun lifts itself above the horizon, you've already been awake for hours. The rest of the day stretches ahead, filled with a rhythm of prayer, study, and labor. For a child, study means endless repetition, copying Latin prayers until your fingers cramp, learning to sing the antiphons in a voice that won't crack, memorizing passages of scripture that blur together in your tired mind. Sometimes your lessons shift to needlework, delicate embroidery that will decorate altar cloths or vestments. Your small fingers fumble at first, but the work is unforgiving. Loose stitches, crooked seams, they're all noticed. Perfection isn't praised, it's simply expected. And then there's the labor. Convents were not purely places of quiet devotion, they were self-sustaining communities. Children hauled water from the well, tended the gardens, scrubbed the stone floors, fed chickens, even stirred the heavy iron pots in the kitchen under the watchful eye of a cook who never smiled. In winter, the stone is so cold your hands ache, but there's no fire just for you. Fires are reserved for the kitchen and maybe the infirmary. Elsewhere, the cold is simply part of the air you breathe. Punishments for mistakes are never far away. Sometimes they're physical, a swat on the hands with a wooden ruler, a few lashes with a switch, kneeling for hours on bare stone while you whisper prayers for forgiveness. Sometimes they're subtler, being made to fast for a meal, given extra chores, or shunned in a way that makes you feel invisible. The idea is to teach humility, obedience, and fear of sin. For a child, it teaches something else too, that your body and will no longer belong entirely to you. Yet in the stillness between tasks, you begin to notice small details that anchor you. The way sunlight spills like honey through the cloister's arches, dust motes spinning lazily in the beam. The faint green scent of herbs from the apothecary garden, sage, rosemary, lavender, that the nuns tend with care. The muted laughter you sometimes hear when older sisters speak quietly to each other in the laundry courtyard, away from prying ears. These moments are rare, but they are yours, and they keep the world from becoming entirely gray. At night, after Compline, you return to your cot in the dormitory. Your body aches, your eyelids feel heavy, but sleep is not a gift you can claim right away. You lie still, listening to the wind rattling the shutters and the low creak of the wooden beams above you. Somewhere far away, the church bell tolls the hour. Tomorrow will be the same as today, and the day after that will be no different. You are part of the rhythm now, an unbroken chain of prayers, work, and silence that binds your childhood to a life chosen for you long before you understood what it meant. You drift towards sleep with the faint scent of wax and cold stone still clinging to you, knowing that the darkness before dawn will come far too soon. Morning comes the same way it always does, abruptly, without mercy. The dormitory bell jolts you from dreams you can't quite remember. You sit up, heart thudding, as the chill instantly bites at your skin. Your woolen habit lies folded at the foot of your cot, scratchy, and still carrying the faint smell of the previous day's labor. You pull it on quickly, teeth clenched against the cold, and follow the shuffling line of girls toward the chapel once again. The darkness of early morning makes the chapel feel otherworldly, like a place caught between night and day. Candlelight pools across the altar, trembling faintly with each movement of the sisters. The psalms begin slow, measured, endless, and you lose yourself in the rhythm, even as your voice threatens to fade. You've learned that drifting too far into your own thoughts risks a sharp nudge from the mistress of novices. She stands like a hawk at the side, her eyes scanning every bowed head, her ears tuned to every note that falls out of place. Prayer isn't simply about devotion here, it's discipline in disguise. Every word must be exact, every movement deliberate. The older girls guide the younger ones with discreet glances or the lightest touch on the arm, making sure no one breaks the fragile order. For a child, it's both comforting and suffocating. You're never truly alone, but you're never free either. After the morning office, the routine continues like clockwork. Today, your task after breakfast is in the scriptorium. The air there smells of ink, vellum, and a faint tang of dust. You sit at a low desk, the light falling just enough from a high window to see your work. Your fingers smudge the black ink as you trace letters over and over, trying to imitate the perfect strokes of the scribe who teaches you. It's a strange form of quiet torment. The room is utterly silent, except for the faint scratch of quills, and every mistake is permanent. There is no erasing on parchment. Each slip becomes a flaw, forever visible to anyone who looks closely. Hours in the scriptorium bend your back and stiffen your fingers. Occasionally the scribe walks past his sandals, scuffing softly on the floor. He rarely speaks, but when he does, it's often to point out how your letters lean too far, or your spacing falters. You nod, swallowing the little lump of frustration in your throat. You want to please him, not because praise is common, it isn't, but because in a place where punishments are swift, the absence of reprimand feels like a gift. The convent garden offers no such reprieve. This afternoon, you're sent to the herb beds to pull weeds. The earth is still damp from a night rain, and it clings stubbornly to your fingers. Around you, rows of sage rue and thyme grow in tidy order. The older nuns tend them with a reverence usually reserved for sacred things. You learn quickly that these plants are more than just pretty greenery. They are medicine food, and sometimes even part of ritual. You watch the infirmarian pluck leaves of mint, explaining to a novice that it soothes upset stomachs. And you think about how in this closed world, every resource must be used wisely. But not all lessons are so gentle. That same afternoon, you witness one of the younger girls falter during a Latin recitation. Her voice wavers, a word slips, and the mistress of novices fixes her with a stare that freezes the air. The girl is ordered to kneel on the stone floor in the corner for the remainder of the session. You know her knees will throb by the time she's allowed to rise, and the humiliation will sting far longer. There is no comfort for her except the knowledge that tomorrow it might be someone else. Meals remain plain vegetables from the garden bread that's gone a little hard, sometimes fish on days when the convent's rules allow. Always eaten in silence, always with scripture recited by a single voice. You chew slowly, not because you want to, but because it's the rhythm here. Nothing hurried, nothing wasted. Even the sound of a spoon against a bowl is noticed. When evening comes, you might think the pace would soften, but it rarely does. Vespers in the chapel mark the close of day's work, but then there are chores to finish before Compline. Tonight you're on laundry duty. It's grueling in its own way, hauling buckets of cold water, scrubbing habits against the washboard until your knuckles sting. The soap bites into your skin, leaving it red and raw, but you keep at it until the pile is gone. Older sisters watch over you, correcting your method if you grow too slow or careless. The truth is, there's no moment in the convent that truly belongs to you. Even your dreams are shaped by its walls. The tolling of bells follows you into sleep, and sometimes you wake with the sensation that the mistress's sharp eyes are still upon you. Still, there are fragments of peace you cling to, a sliver of sunset over the cloister wall, the distant coo of pigeons nesting in the belfry, the warmth of a candle's glow against the cold stone as you make your way back to your cot. These tiny things remind you that life here isn't entirely without beauty. It's just beauty you have to learn to notice in the smallest of ways. And so you end another day exactly as it began, in silence, in order, in a world that is as unyielding as the stone beneath your knees. You wake before the bell this time, not because you've adjusted to the schedule, but because your body already expects the cold. The darkness in the dormitory feels heavy, as though it presses down on you. You lie still for a moment, listening to the slow breaths of the other girls. Somewhere a draft slips under the shutters and brushes against your face like a thin, icy hand. The bell finally tolls, deep and deliberate. and the room stirs awake. This morning the air smells faintly of damp wool and tallow candles left to smolder overnight. You rise, dress quickly, and file with the others toward the chapel. Your bare feet slap softly on the worn flagstones, each step following the same route you've taken every day since you arrived. It's strange how quickly the extraordinary becomes routine. The chapel looms ahead, its shadowy entrance swallowing you whole. Inside, the ritual begins again, Matins lauds, the measured chanting of psalms. The words blur into each other until they no longer seem like language, just a kind of low, endless tide moving in and out. The cold settles deep into your bones, but you keep your posture straight. A single lapse, a drooping head, a slouch will be met with a reminder. And reminders here are never gentle. Today's lesson is in plain chant. The mistress of novices stands at the front of the small choir, her hands shaping the air as she guides the pitch and rhythm. You've learned that the music is not meant to be beautiful in a worldly sense. It's meant to be pure, stripped of ornament, as if beauty itself must be offered humbly. Your voice blends with the others, and for a fleeting moment, you feel something you can't quite name, a strange unity that is both comforting and unsettling. After breakfast, bread that crumbles into coarse crumbs in your hands. A sip of thin ale, you are assigned to the kitchen. The cook, a tall, broad-shouldered sister with a permanently furrowed brow, puts you to work peeling root vegetables. The paring knife feels clumsy in your small hand, and you focus intently on each stroke. Around you, the kitchen hums with quiet efficiency. Pots clank, ladles scrape against cauldrons, the fire spits and hisses. The smells here are different, earthy, smoky, edged with the tang of onions and herbs. You find yourself breathing more deeply, grateful for the hint of warmth the hearth provides. But the warmth is only temporary. By mid-morning, you're sent to help carry water from the well. The bucket's wooden handle digs into your palms, and the water sloshes against your legs as you walk. You learn to balance your steps, to move steadily so the precious liquid isn't wasted. It's not just about doing the job, it's about doing it without complaint. In the convent, silent endurance is its own virtue. One of the older girls whispers a warning to you later in the day. The mistress has been in a foul mood. You keep your head down, your work precise. You've seen what happens when her patience runs thin. Sometimes it's a public correction, a sharp rebuke that burns your cheeks with shame. Sometimes it's a private penance handed down in the quiet of the cloister walk, where no one can hear but the cold stone walls. The afternoon lesson is in embroidery again. You sit in a long row of girls' needles in hand, thread trailing across your laps like spider silk. The work demands stillness, and stillness demands discipline. A dropped needle, a tangled thread, and you'll feel the mistress's presence behind you before she even speaks. Yet there is a strange kind of solace in the repetition. The in-out pull smooth until the cloth beneath your fingers begins to bloom with careful patterns. Later, you tend the garden with 2 other novices. The air is crisp and a faint mist clings to the ground. You kneel among the herbs, your fingers brushing over leaves still beaded with dew. There's rosemary here and rue, and something the infirmarian calls comfrey. She explains, without looking up from her work, that its roots are used for healing broken bones. You file the knowledge away, wondering if the garden holds remedies for other, less visible kinds of hurt. Evening brings vespers, then the silent meal thin vegetable broth tonight, with a piece of dark rye bread. The reading during supper is from the life of Saint Scholastica. Her piety described in such glowing terms, you almost expect her to step through the refectory door. You wonder if she ever felt cold, hungry, or tired the way you do now. Somehow, the hagiographies never mention those things. Before Compline, you're assigned to sweep the cloister walk. The broom is little more than a bundle of stiff twigs bound to a wooden handle, and it scrapes loudly across the flagstones. The rhythmic sound seems to echo in the arches, blending with the soft hush of the night wind. You pause for a moment, looking out into the darkened courtyard. The moon hangs low, caught between the stone silhouettes of the walls. It strikes you that you haven't seen beyond those walls in weeks, maybe months. The world outside might as well be a dream. When the final prayers are said and the candles snuffed out, you return to your cot. The dormitory is cold again, but the heaviness in your limbs pulls you toward sleep quickly. You close your eyes, and the day folds in on itself, becoming just another in a long chain of days. And still, somewhere deep inside, you keep a small corner of your mind untouched, a place where the bells don't ring, where the air isn't cold, where no one is watching you all the time. You visit it just before you drift off, as the darkness claims you once more. The cold is sharper this morning, the kind that seeps into your bones before you've even left your cot. The bell sounds in the dark, each toll heavy and patient, as if daring you to move any slower than its pace. You sit up, your breath a pale ghost in the air. Around you, the other girls shift under their thin blankets, the rustle of cloth and the creak of beds echoing faintly in the cavernous dormitory. No one speaks. Words are not meant for this hour. The chapel is a shadowed world when you arrive. Candle flames flutter against the gloom, casting tall, wavering figures along the stone walls. Matins begins with the same slow chant as everyday voices weaving together into a droning river of sound. Your mouth shapes the Latin words automatically now, though their meanings still swim beyond you like fish darting in deep water. The mistress's gaze moves among you, alert for any faltering. She seems more watchful than usual, her posture taut. You keep your eyes lowered, your hands folded just so. By the time Lauds ends, a faint grayness has begun to bleed into the stained glass windows. Breakfast is small as always, a hunk of bread, a swallow of ale that leaves a trace of bitterness on your tongue. You eat quickly in silence while a sister reads from the rule. Today's passage speaks of humility, how a child of God must hold no pride, speak only when spoken to, obey without question. You can't help but think that here humility is not merely a virtue, it is survival. After breakfast, you're sent to the laundry yard. The cold bites at your fingers as you plunge them into the wooden washtub, the water so icy it feels like knives. You scrub linen habits against the washboard, your hands reddening and raw. The nuns work with the same steady pace they give to every task, and you follow suit, biting down on the urge to pause. The laundry yard smells faintly of lye soap and damp cloth. Overhead, the clouds hang low, promising snow. When your hands are too numb to feel the cloth anymore, you're reassigned to the scriptorium. The shift in work brings no relief here. The challenge is the relentless precision demanded of you. The room is hushed, the air tinged with the metallic scent of ink. You take up the quill, its feather tickling your wrist, and dip it carefully into the inkwell. Your task today is to copy the day's antiphons onto a narrow strip of vellum. Every line must be straight, every letter crisp. A blot of ink or a crooked curve will earn you a stern glance from the scribe and perhaps extra work. The hours stretch until the light outside fades into a watery midday. You're called away to the refectory for the noon meal, a ladle of lentil stew and a wedge of coarse rye bread. Again, a sister reads aloud this time from the lives of the desert fathers describing the austerities they endured. You think not for the first time that their world doesn't sound so different from yours, only yours has stone walls instead of desert sands. The afternoon brings garden duty. The earth is stiff with frost, but the work must be done. You kneel by the cold soil, pulling up the last stubborn weeds before winter fully claims the ground. Beside you, the infirmarian collects dried seed heads in a basket, murmuring to herself about planting next spring. You notice how she handles the plants with a gentleness absent from the mistress's discipline. It's a reminder that kindness still lives here even if it hides in small corners. Later, a younger novice is caught whispering during embroidery. The mistress appears without a sound, her eyes narrowing. The girl's face drains of color as she's told to hold her arms out straight, a heavy psalter balanced across them. You know the punishment, your own arms once trembled under the same weight. It's not the pain itself, but the length of it, the slow ache that burns deeper with every passing minute that makes it so cruel. As the day wanes, the bell calls you to vespers. The chapel feels warmer now, the candles brighter against the early night. You sing the psalms with weary precision, the notes rising and falling like the breath of the building itself. When it's over, supper is a modest affair, barley porridge, a few boiled greens. You eat without tasting, more focused on finishing before the bell calls you again. The final chore of the day is to sweep the cloister walk. The broom's bristles rasp over the stone, each stroke echoing in the arches. You catch glimpses of the sky through the open side stars beginning to prick the velvet dark, the moon a thin crescent above the roofline. For a moment, you linger at the edge, imagining the world beyond the wall, the sound of a village at night, the smell of hearth smoke curling from chimneys. But then the mistress's voice calls sharply, pulling you back into the stone embrace. Compline closes the day in the chapel's dim glow. The prayers are shorter now, softer, as if even the strict rhythm of the convent can't resist the pull of sleep. You return to the dormitory, sliding beneath your thin blanket. Your hands still sting from the cold water of the morning, your shoulders ache from the broom, and your eyes grow heavy almost at once. As you drift toward sleep, you think about the endless loop of days here, how each one folds into the next, identical, yet somehow heavier with each passing. And still, somewhere deep within you, a stubborn ember of self remains glowing quietly in the dark. The bell wakes you again before the sky has even begun to think about light. It's always the same 3 slow tolls, a pause, then 3 more. And yet somehow this morning they feel heavier, as if they've been wrung from deeper within the earth. You push the blanket aside and your feet hit the cold stone floor. It's a small shock that clears away the haze of sleep faster than any gentle awakening could. Around you, the other girls rise in silence, movements practiced to the point of instinct. No one says good morning. The convent has no use for greetings. You walk together through the long corridor toward the chapel. The corridor windows are just darker shapes in the walls, black panes against the faint gray of pre-dawn. The air tastes faintly of last night's smoke from the kitchen hearth, mixed with the ever-present chill of stone. When you step inside the chapel, the light from the altar candles looks almost alive, flickering across the carved faces of saints that line the walls. The statues watch you as you take your place, their stony gazes unchanging, no matter how many times you bow before them. Matins begins. Your voice joins the river of chant notes, rising and falling in the same pattern you've sung 100 times before. It's the repetition that's meant to shape you, to press you into the mold of obedience without you realizing it. You've heard the older sisters say that the mind wanders less when the tongue is always busy with prayer. Maybe that's true, but you've also learned to tuck small thoughts away, let them drift quietly under the surface of the chant where no one can see them. When lauds ends, you follow the others into the refectory for breakfast. Bread and ale again, the crust harder this morning, the ale sharper. A sister reads from the rule, her voice steady as she speaks of silence, how even necessary speech should be rare, how idle talk is a danger to the soul. You think of how rarely you hear laughter here, how quickly even a whispered joke can be snuffed out. Your morning assignment is in the kitchen again. The cook sets you to grinding barley in the heavy stone quern. The work is slow, the handle stiff, and your arms begin to ache almost immediately. You keep your head down, eyes on the grain, as it becomes coarse meal beneath your hands. The sound of the quern stone is a low, grinding hum that somehow feels older than the walls around you. When the work is done, your forearms throb, and your palms are gritty with flour. Later, you carry baskets of vegetables to the storeroom. The root cellar smells of earth and damp wood. You stack turnips and carrots in neat rows along the shelves, careful not to bruise them. It's quiet here, almost peaceful, though you know you can't linger. The convent's rhythm allows no pauses beyond the ones it grants you. After the midday meal, pea soup and bread, you're led to the scriptorium. Today, the work is to illuminate the margins of a manuscript. The older scribe shows you how to lay gold leaf with the lightest touch, how to let it catch the candlelight without wrinkling. Your fingers tremble with the delicacy of it, and you breathe slower just to keep your hand steady. The gold catches the dim light and glows faintly, a tiny shimmer of beauty in a world that rarely makes room for such things. The afternoon turns bitterly cold. You're sent to the cloister garden to help gather firewood. The woodpile stands against the north wall, the logs dusted with frost. Your fingers stiffen around each piece, but you carry them one by one to the kitchen without complaint. Complaints don't belong here, they only mark you as weak, and weakness draws attention you don't want. By the time Vespers arrives, your limbs feel heavy. The chapel is warmer now, the candles throwing wide halos of light against the stone. You sing the psalms in the measured voice you've been taught, each note in its place. As you glance down the line of novices, you notice the same stillness in every face, the same careful neutrality. In this place, even your expression must obey. Supper is plain porridge with a sprinkle of dried herbs and quickly finished. The last chore of the evening is cleaning the refectory floor. You work with a stiff brush, scrubbing at the worn boards until your knees ache. The scent of the day's meals still lingers here, mingled with the sharp tang of lye soap. As you work, you notice tiny cracks in the floorboards, crumbs caught in the seams, faint scuffs from decades of feet passing over the same space. It occurs to you that every inch of this place has been worn down by hands and feet just like yours, year after year. Compline closes the day. The candles burn lower the air in the chapel cooler. The final prayers feel softer somehow, though. You know that's only the weariness settling into your bones. When you return to the dormitory, you lie on your cot and stare at the dark rafters overhead. Somewhere outside, an owl calls once, twice. You think of the gold leaf from the manuscript still on your fingertips, the way it caught the light like a secret. It's a small thing, but here small things matter more than anyone will ever say aloud. The cold is so sharp this morning, it feels like it could slice through the wool of your habit. Even before the bell, your breath curls in pale ribbons above your blanket. You lie there for a moment. knowing the instant your feet touch the floor, the day will claim you completely. The bell tolls and the dormitory stirs, bodies moving in near silence, the faint rasp of fabric, the creak of old boards underfoot. No one lingers. There's no space in this place for hesitation. The corridor to the chapel smells faintly of damp stone and smoke from last night's hearth fire. Candles along the walls flicker faintly, their light barely touching the edges of the cold. Inside the chapel, Matins begins in that same slow, deliberate rhythm you've grown used to. The chant folds over itself like the layers of the habit on your shoulders, familiar, heavy, and unchanging. The mistress's eyes roam over the rows of bowed heads. You match the pitch carefully, not daring to let your voice stray even a fraction. Lauds follows without pause, and by the time it ends, a faint silver has begun to glow behind the chapel's narrow windows. Breakfast is as predictable as the prayers, bread with a crust that scratches your gums, ale that still tastes faintly of the cask. A sister reads from the rule about patience in adversity, her voice even as if the very idea of resistance has been forgotten. You keep your gaze on your hands folded neatly in your lap. Your first task is in the scriptorium, where the air smells of vellum candle wax and a faint tang of metal from the ink knives. The scribe assigns you to prepare parchment sheets, scraping them smooth with a curved blade, then rubbing them with powdered pumice. The blade catches now and then, making your shoulders tense. The work is both tedious and exacting, and each sheet must pass under the scribe's fingers before it can be used. When he nods, it feels like a rare victory. By mid-morning, your hands ache from the scraping, and you're sent to the kitchen to help with the midday meal. The cook hands you a knife and a basket of leeks, their papery skins clinging to your fingers as you peel them. Steam from the boiling pot curls in the air, dampening your face and blurring the edges of the world into something softer. But the cook doesn't allow idling. Once the leeks are in the pot, she sends you to grind dried peas into flour with a heavy pestle. The rhythm of pounding and turning becomes a kind of wordless prayer in itself. After the noon meal, pea porridge and bread, you are assigned to the laundry yard. The water is so cold your fingers feel almost numb before you finish the first habit. You wring each one until your wrists ache, then hang them along the line strung across the yard. The wind tugs at the wet fabric, snapping it like sails. You can feel it cutting through your sleeves, chilling you to the bone. The afternoon brings embroidery work again, this time in a narrow room just off the cloister walk. The mistress moves slowly among the rows, her steps silent on the stone. You bend over your hoop, stitching a border of gold thread around a linen altar cloth. The gold catches the dim light in tiny sparks. Each stitch is small, precise, unyielding, much like the life here itself. Across the room, a girl drops her needle, the faint clatter sounding far louder than it should. The mistress's shadow falls across her before she even bends to retrieve it. When vespers comes, you welcome the shift in rhythm, even though it means more standing, more singing, more careful composure. The psalms rise and fall like slow tides, and for a moment, you can almost let the sound carry you. The candles flicker in the cold air, their flames bowing toward the stone as if in their own form of devotion. Supper is simple root vegetables boiled in thin broth. You eat without hurry, without conversation. The reader's voice tonight is slow, deliberate, recounting the trials of a saint who endured decades of silence. You wonder if she ever longed to scream just to hear her own voice. The last task of the day is tending the chapel candles. You trim their wicks with small curved scissors, the charred ends falling softly into your palm. You replace the ones burned low, setting fresh ones in their holders. The smell of warm wax is comforting. In a way you can't explain, it lingers even after you leave, following you into the cool stone corridors. Compline comes at last. The prayers are short, the chanting soft, the shadows deep. You walk back to the dormitory, the sound of your own footsteps muffled by the straw mats in the hall. When you slip under your blanket, your fingers still smell faintly of wax and leaks. Your shoulders ache, and your eyelids grow heavy almost at once. You think about the gold thread in the altar cloth, the way it caught the light. It's such a small brightness in the endless gray. But you hold it in your mind as you drift toward sleep, letting it glow quietly in the darkness. You wake in darkness to the same slow toll of the bell, its voice deep and deliberate echoing through the dormitory rafters. The air feels colder than yesterday, if that's possible. And for a moment you hesitate under the thin blanket, your breath making small clouds in front of your face. But hesitation is dangerous here. You swing your legs out of bed, and your bare feet meet the stone, the shock biting up through your bones. The girls move like a silent river toward the chapel. The corridor smells faintly of damp linen from yesterday's laundry, the scent mingling with the ever-present coolness of stone. Candles along the walls sputter faintly, their light too thin to chase the shadows. You slip into the chapel's dim interior and take your place. The statues of saints watch from their alcoves, their carved eyes fixed on a point far beyond you. Matins begins, and your voice joins the others in its slow rise and fall. The chant wraps itself around you like the wool of your habit, weighty, unchanging, unavoidable. The mistress paces quietly along the line of novices, her eyes lingering on each bowed head. You focus on keeping your voice steady, careful not to drift off key. The notes feel like the only thing tethering you to the present moment. Lauds follows without pause, and by the time it ends, a thin gray light filters weakly through the chapel windows. Breakfast is bread again, but the crust is softer this morning, and the ale a touch less bitter. A sister reads from the rule about the dangers of idleness, warning that an idle mind invites the devil. You find yourself thinking that no such danger exists. Here, idleness is the rarest thing in this place. Your morning work is in the kitchen, sorting through baskets of root vegetables brought in from the storeroom. The air is warmer here, heavy with the earthy scent of carrots and the faint sweetness of parsnips. You brush the dirt from each one, stack them neatly, and carry them to the cook. She says nothing, simply nods toward the next task, grinding salt from coarse blocks into fine grains with a pestle. The sound of stone on stone becomes your world for the next hour, steady and dull. By mid-morning, you are sent to the cloister walk to scrub the flagstones. The bucket of water is cold enough to sting your fingers with each dip of the rag. You work in slow arcs, darkening the stone with each pass. The cloister is open on one side to the courtyard, and the cold wind moves freely through its arches. Your knuckles ache, but you keep going, careful not to miss a patch. The mistress passes through, once her footsteps quiet, her eyes sweeping over your work. She says nothing. That's the closest thing to approval you'll get today. The midday meal is barley gruel with a small hunk of bread. The reader's voice carries over the sound of spoons scraping bowls, telling the story of a saint who fasted for 40 days. You think about the gnawing in your own stomach and wonder how she survived. But here, hunger is never truly surprising. It's just another thread in the weave of your life. This afternoon, you are sent to the scriptorium. Your task is to mix ink from oak galls, iron salts, and water. The oak gall dust clings to your skin, leaving a faint itch. You stir the mixture slowly, watching it deepen from pale brown to a rich, heavy black. The scribe shows you how to test it with a quill, the ink spreading cleanly across the parchment. He nods once, then sends you to your desk to begin copying. Each letter is deliberate, each curve exact. A slip of the quill could ruin an entire page, and the thought makes your shoulders tense. Later, you join the others in the garden to gather herbs before the frost takes them. The rosemary is sharp and resinous under your fingers, the thyme delicate and earthy. You tuck sprigs into small bundles, tying them with rough twine. The infirmarian thanks you softly, her voice one of the few gentle ones you hear in a day. As evening falls, Vespers calls you back to the chapel. The light from the candles seems warmer now against the dark, the chant rising like slow smoke. You keep your voice steady, letting it blend into the whole. Supper is a thin vegetable broth eaten under the steady rhythm of Scripture. The reader's voice tonight is lower, slower, like a lullaby meant for the devout. Before Compline, you are sent to refill the oil in the chapel lamps. You carry the heavy clay jug carefully, the smell of the oil strong and earthy. The lamps hiss softly as you top them up, and for a moment you're bathed in their small golden light. It's one of the few truly warm glows you'll see all day. Compline ends the day, and you return to your cot. The dormitory is silent, except for the faint creak of wood and the wind outside. You curl under the thin blanket, your fingers still smelling faintly of rosemary and lamp oil. You hold on to those scents as you drift toward sleep, because they are proof that somewhere in all this grayness, small traces of life remain. The bell's toll is your alarm, as it always is, deep, steady, and final. By now your body wakes almost in rhythm with it, the sound folding into your dreams, until you're pulled up from sleep like a stone from water. You push back the thin blanket, feeling the cold coil instantly around you. The dormitory is a faint haze of shadows. Girls move like wraiths toward their folded habits, dressing in silence. The boards creak softly under bare feet. You join the narrow stream of novices heading to the chapel. The corridor air is damp, carrying the faint smell of last night's extinguished candles and the mineral scent of stone that has soaked up centuries of breath and footsteps. A candle in a wall sconce flickers as you pass, casting your shadow long and thin across the wall. Inside the chapel, the air is colder still, but alive with the low murmur of settling voices before matins. The statues remain at their eternal vigil, their eyes fixed past you, their carved mouths forever closed. Matins begins, and the chant rolls forward like the tide. Your voice weaves into it without thought, each syllable a step in the path you walk every morning. The mistress moves between the rows, the swish of her habit brushing the floor. She carries no staff yet, her presence alone feels like one, a constant reminder to stand straight, sing, true obey without pause. Lauds passes in its unhurried, relentless way. When it's done, the faintest thread of light shows in the sky beyond the narrow windows. In the refectory, breakfast is bread and ale again, though today the bread is stale enough to make your jaw ache. A sister reads from the rule about obedience, her voice flat but unwavering. A true servant obeys without delay. You think about how here delay doesn't just invite rebuke, it brands you as resistant, something no one dares to be. Your first task is hauling water from the well. The rope burns against your hands as you pull the bucket's weight, a familiar drag on your shoulders. The water is so cold it aches in your palms as you pour it into the waiting pails. You carry them carefully across the courtyard, mindful of the uneven stones beneath your feet. No one thanks you, but no one scolds you either, which is the best you can hope for. By mid-morning, you're sent to the scriptorium. The air inside is still and smells faintly of lamp oil and dust. Today's work is repairing a torn page from an old book. You brush paste along the ragged edge, lay a strip of thin vellum over it, and smooth it gently with a bone folder. The scribe watches his face unreadable until he nods and turns away. You keep your breathing steady. Small successes here are quiet, almost invisible things. The midday meal is fish stew thin with more broth than flesh and bread that crumbles at the touch. The reader's voice recites the life of a holy virgin who spent her youth in seclusion. You imagine her in a place like this and wonder if she ever felt her walls closing in or if faith was enough to make the walls disappear. This afternoon, you are sent to the garden to turn the soil in the cold frames. The earth is stiff, clinging to the spade in dark, damp clumps. Your breath clouds the air as you work, and your fingers tingle with the slow ache of cold settling into your bones. A robin hops across the path nearby, cocking its head at you before darting away. For a moment, the flash of its red breast feels like a spark against the gray day. Later, you join the embroidery room, working gold thread into the edge of a stole. The mistress moves silently among the rows, her shadow falling over your hands as you pull the thread through linen. Each stitch must be identical, each space precise. You don't dare look up until she moves on. Vespers brings the day toward its close. The chant fills the chapel with long, slow notes that seem to hang in the air even after the last voice falls silent. Supper is barley porridge again, and a reading about a hermit who lived in a cave for decades. You think about how in some ways you already live in your own cave. It just has higher ceilings and a choir. Before Compline, you're assigned to polish the candlesticks in the chapel. You rub each one with a scrap of linen until the dull metal blooms into a faint shine. The scent of the polish clings to your fingers, a sharp contrast to the softer wax smell you've come to associate with this place. The candlesticks catch the light of the few remaining candles, throwing warm gleams against the cold stone. Compline ends in near darkness, the chapel shadows pooling in every corner. You walk back to the dormitory, each step muffled by the straw mats. Curling under your blanket, you let your thoughts drift not toward escape, but toward the robin in the garden, the red of its breast, bright as fire against winter's gray. You hold on to that image as sleep folds itself over you. The bell tolls in the deep dark again, the sound rolling through the rafters like distant thunder. You wake instantly, your body now trained to answer its call. The cold greets you before your eyes are even fully open, pressing against your skin as you throw back the thin blanket. The dormitory is still cloaked in shadow, but you can see the faint outlines of the other girls moving with the same weary precision. There's no speech, no yawning, no lingering. The day begins, as it always does, in silence. The corridor to the chapel smells faintly of damp wool, as if yesterday's laundry never truly dried. Candles gutter in their sconces as you pass, casting jittery shadows along the walls. Inside the chapel, the air is colder still, but alive with the slow murmur of settling voices. Matins begins, and you open your mouth to join the chant. The words fall into place without thought, each note a step in an invisible ladder you climb each morning. The mistress moves between the rows, her eyes keen in the dim light. You keep your gaze fixed on your psalter lips, moving steadily, careful not to falter. Lauds follows the chant, flowing into it without pause. By the time it ends, the faintest gray line stains the sky outside the narrow windows. Breakfast is bread again, harder than yesterday's, and ale that leaves a bitter tang on your tongue. A sister reads from the rule about enduring hardship with joy. You find the words almost laughable, but here laughter is a thing to swallow before it ever reaches your lips. This morning your work begins in the kitchen, chopping turnips for the midday meal. The knife feels heavy in your small hand, its handle smooth from years of use. The air is warmer here, filled with the mingled scents of earth herbs and the faint smoke curling from the hearth. Once the turnips are cut, you are sent to stir a pot of barley and leeks. The steam dampens your cheeks and fogs your vision, and for a brief moment you relish the warmth before you're called to another task. Mid-morning finds you in the cloister garden helping to clear away the last fallen leaves before the frost deepens. The air bites at your cheeks, and the leaves crackle under your fingers as you gather them into baskets. The infirmarian moves among the beds, checking the plants that will survive winter. She shows you how to strip dried lavender blossoms into a jar, their scent filling the air with something unexpectedly soft. You carry the jar back to the infirmary, the aroma clinging faintly to your hands. The midday meal is pea soup, thin and pale with a crust of bread. The reader's voice tells of a saint who bore his suffering without complaint. You spoon the soup slowly, wondering if he'd ever felt his stomach knot the way yours does now. In the afternoon, you are sent to the scriptorium to work on rubrication, adding red letters to mark important passages. The red ink smells faintly metallic, and you must dip your quill lightly to keep it from blotting. The scribe inspects each initial. You make his eyebrow lifting slightly if your line wavers. You keep your breathing steady, your hand slow. There's no rushing precision here. Haste only leads to error, and error leads to the mistress's attention. Later, you join the embroidery room. The task is to stitch a narrow band of blue silk onto the hem of a linen alb. The silk slides under your fingers like water, so unlike the coarse wool you wear each day. For a while you lose yourself in the texture, the quiet repetition of stitch after stitch. Across the room a younger girl fumbles, and the mistress's shadow falls across her. A sharp word, a lowered head, and silence swallows the room again. Vespers comes as the sky darkens the chapel warmer now, with candlelight pooling across the altar. You sing the psalms with the others, letting the notes blur together until they feel almost like breathing. Supper is root vegetable broth, eaten as a sister reads from the life of another silent hermit. The words feel like echoes of all the other readings you've heard, a litany of endurance, humility, and unquestioning faith. Before Compline, you are told to polish the brass door handles along the main corridor. You rub each one until it gleams faintly in the candlelight. Your reflection looks back at you in warped gold, a thin, pale child in a habit too big for her shoulders. You glance away quickly, almost startled by the sight. Compline ends with its soft finality, the chapel falling quiet as the candles are snuffed. You walk back to the dormitory, the hall dark, except for the occasional flicker of light through a half-closed door. Curling beneath your blanket, you think about the lavender scent still clinging to your fingers. It's a small thing, but it lingers, softening the day just enough to carry you into sleep. The bell tolls again, that deep, slow summons that shakes you from the shallow warmth of sleep. You rise automatically now, your movements so practiced, they feel detached from thought. The dormitory is hushed, except for the faint whisper of cloth and the occasional groan of wood under shifting weight. Your breath curls white in the air, and when your bare feet meet the stone, it's as though you've stepped into ice water. The procession to the chapel moves like a shadow across the cloister walk. The air outside bites at your face, and you pull your habit close, though it never truly keeps the cold at bay. Inside the chapel, the statues loom in their familiar stillness, the saints caught forever in gestures of blessing or prayer. Matins begins, and your voice joins the low river of chant without resistance. Each syllable is another stone in the endless path you've been walking since you arrived. The mistress glides past her steps soundless, her gaze sweeping over the rows like a cold wind. Lauds follows the notes, stretching and falling like a slow tide. When it's over, the sky outside is still pale and unformed. In the refectory, breakfast is a thin slice of bread and ale with a sharper edge than yesterday's. The reading this morning is from the Rule on Humility again. The monk must consider himself always the lowest of all, and you wonder if they choose these passages on purpose when the days are coldest. Your work today begins in the scriptorium, preparing parchment for a new manuscript. You scrape it with a lunellum blade, the sound a soft rasp that fills the quiet. The skin is stiff from the cold, and each pass takes patience. When the scribe inspects your work, his approval comes only as a brief nod. You take it without words, slipping the finished sheets into the neat pile by the desk. By mid-morning, you're sent to the kitchen to help with the midday meal. The cook sets you to peeling onions, their papery skins crumbling under your fingers. The sharp scent fills your eyes with tears, but you work steadily, slicing each one with careful, even strokes. The hearth fire roars nearby, a welcome heat you wish you could stay beside longer. But as soon as the onions are done, you're sent to fetch water from the well, the wind tugging at your sleeves as you carry the sloshing pails back across the courtyard. The midday meal is a stew of onions and barley steaming faintly in the cool air of the refectory. The reader's voice tells of a saint who endured her life in confinement without once asking to be freed. You chew your bread slowly, wondering if that's what true holiness means here, never questioning the bars around you. The afternoon brings work in the laundry yard. The washtub water is so cold it burns, and the habits you scrub are heavy with the weight of winter damp. You wring them out with stiff hands, hanging each one carefully on the line. The wind twists the wet cloth, snapping it sharply like a warning. Later, you're sent to the embroidery room to continue work on the stole from earlier in the week. The silk still feels strange under your fingers, too soft, too fine compared to the coarse wool you wear each day. You stitch in silence, keeping the spacing exact. Across the table, a girl pricks her finger, and a bead of blood blooms bright against the pale fabric. She hides it quickly, dabbing the spot with a rag before the mistress notices. Vespers comes as the sky darkens the chapel, bathed in a deeper gold from the candles. The chant rises slowly, the notes heavy and deliberate. You match them carefully, your voice folding into the whole. Supper is thin pea soup with a slice of rye bread eaten under the steady drone of a reading about yet another silent ascetic. Before Compline, your task is to tend the fire in the kitchen hearth. You add logs one by one, the flames licking up greedily. The warmth reaches your hands, sinking into your stiff fingers. You stand close for as long as you dare before returning the poker to its hook and stepping back into the chill corridors. Compline ends with the chapel in near darkness, the candles casting only the faintest pools of light. You walk back to the dormitory, the straw mats soft under your tired feet. Curling beneath your blanket, you can still feel the echo of the kitchen's warmth in your palms. It's fading quickly, but you hold on to it in your mind as you drift toward sleep, as if it might keep you warm until morning. The bell drags you from sleep once again, its deep, deliberate toll resonating through the beams overhead. Your eyes open to the dim, bluish dark of the dormitory. The air is so cold your breath hangs in front of your face before fading into nothing. You rise without thinking, each movement part of a ritual, now as fixed as the prayers themselves. The boards groan faintly under shifting weight as the other girls dress in silence. There's no talking, there never is. The walk to the chapel is a slow shuffle over stone. Outside the dormitory door, the air feels sharper than yesterday, the kind that bites through wool and seems to sink straight into your chest. A pale moon still hangs in the sky, caught between the black arches of the cloister roof. You step into the chapel's shadowed interior, the faint warmth from last night's candles long gone. The statues of saints are dim shapes in the darkness, their carved faces unreadable in the flicker of a few small flames. Matins begins with its slow, sonorous chant. Your voice folds into the stream of sound, neither louder nor softer than the others. The mistress glides along the row, her eyes scanning each bowed head. You keep your gaze fixed on the psalter in your hands, your lips moving with careful precision. The chant winds into lauds, and by the time it ends, a thin wash of gray has begun to touch the stained glass windows. Breakfast is bread again, hard enough to make you chew slowly, and ale that leaves a faint metallic tang at the back of your throat. The reading from the rule this morning is about poverty. All things are to be held in common. No one is to claim anything as her own. You think about your single wooden comb, your little sewing kit items you touch every day but can't truly call yours. Here, ownership belongs only to the convent. Your first task today is in the storeroom. The air is thick with the scents of dried herbs, old wood, and the faint mustiness of long-kept grain. You're told to sort sacks of flour, stacking them neatly against the wall. The burlap scratches your palms and dust rises with each movement tickling your nose. You work until your arms ache, then carry baskets of dried beans to the kitchen. By mid-morning, you are in the scriptorium again, this time tasked with ruling lines on fresh parchment. You use a sharp stylus, pressing lightly but firmly to mark the faint grooves that will guide the writing. The work demands a steady hand, and the faint scrape of metal against skin-smooth parchment becomes a kind of background music. The scribe inspects your work, once nods without comment, and moves on. The midday meal is barley gruel, thicker than usual, perhaps because the cook added extra grain. The reader's voice tells the story of a saint who wore the same garment for years until it fell apart on her back. You glance at your own habit, coarse and worn, and think that you could probably do the same without much trouble. The afternoon takes you to the garden to help the infirmarian cut the last of the autumn rosemary. The plants are woody and sharp under your fingers, their scent strong enough to linger even as the wind bites at your cheeks. You bundle the sprigs with twine, setting them in baskets for drying. The infirmarian explains how they'll be hung in the warmest part of the kitchen to keep their fragrance through the winter. Her voice is low, but there's a gentleness in it that feels rare here. Later, you are sent to the embroidery room, working blue silk into the edge of an altar cloth. The silk glides between your fingers, softer than anything you own. Across the room, a girl sneezes, and the mistress's sharp glance sweeps over her like a blade. No word is spoken, but the silence deepens. Vespers draws the day toward evening. The psalms rise in the chapel, the candles making small islands of gold in the deepening shadows. Supper is turnip soup, thin but hot eaten, as the reader tells of another hermit who lived in constant prayer. The words blur together after a while, different names, same virtues, same hardships. Before Compline, you are sent to refill the sand in the candle trays, brushing away the ash from burned wicks. The grains hiss faintly as they pour from your hands into the trays. When the candles are lit again, the flames dance low, their light trembling against the stone. Compline closes the day with its brief prayers, and you walk back to the dormitory through corridors that smell faintly of cold air and smoke from the kitchen hearth. Curling beneath your blanket, you can still smell rosemary on your hands, sharp and green even in the darkness. You hold on to that scent as you drift toward sleep, letting it carry you somewhere quieter than the convent walls. The bell tolls in the same slow cadence, a sound so constant, it now threads through your dreams. You rise before the last note fades, already reaching for your habit in the half-light. The dormitory is as it always is, silent shapes dressing without a word, bare feet whispering over stone. Your breath mists faintly in the air as you follow the line of girls toward the chapel. The cloister walk is darker this morning, clouds hanging low over the courtyard and swallowing the moonlight. The air smells faintly of wet stone as though rain passed in the night. Inside the chapel, the cold is sharper than the corridors. The saints stare down from their alcoves, their carved eyes deep in shadow. Matins begins the chant, rolling forward in its deliberate rise and fall. You follow each note as if it's a stepping stone over deep water. The mistress passes behind you, her presence so close you feel the faint shift in the air. Lauds follows, and by the time it ends, the light outside has shifted from deep gray to the palest silver. In the refectory, breakfast is bread and ale again. Today's reading from the Rule speaks of the dangers of murmuring, how even silent discontent can poison the soul. You focus on chewing slowly, because here even thoughts feel like something you must guard. Your morning work is in the kitchen, pounding dried herbs into powder for the infirmary. The pestle thuds softly against the mortar, the scent of sage and lavender rising with each grind. It's warm near the hearth, and you linger a little too long between tasks, letting the heat soak into your hands before the cook calls you to peel turnips. Their skins curl away in pale ribbons, the sound soft against the crackle of the fire. By mid-morning, you're sent to the laundry yard. The water in the tub is icy, numbing your fingers almost instantly. You scrub a heavy woolen cloak, the soap stinging the raw skin on your knuckles. When it's finally clean, you wring it out with stiff, aching hands and hang it on the line. The wind makes the wet fabric slap sharply against the posts, the sound carrying across the yard. The midday meal is carrot and barley soup with bread. The reader speaks of a saint who endured long winters in silence and prayer. You think of the cold in your own bones and wonder if holiness feels any warmer when you're the one enduring it. The afternoon brings a task in the scriptorium, trimming the edges of finished pages with a sharp knife so they align perfectly. Each stroke must be smooth, each corner square. The knife whispers through the vellum, the sound strangely satisfying in the stillness. When you stack the trimmed sheets, their edges line up in a perfect block, and you feel a small, quiet satisfaction that you won't dare voice. Later, you're called to the garden to collect the last of the leeks before frost ruins them. The soil is cold and clings to the roots in damp clumps. Your fingers sting as you work, but you loosen each plant carefully, shaking the earth away. The smell of fresh-cut leeks clings to your hands, sharp and green. Vespers arrives with the early dark. The chapel glows with candlelight shadows stretching long across the floor. The chant is slow tonight, each note lingering in the air like breath on a cold window. Supper is pea porridge with a scattering of dried herbs eaten as the reader tells of another recluse whose days were filled with fasting and prayer. Before compline, you are sent to clean the brass lamp fittings in the chapel. You rub them with a cloth until the metal catches the light, warm against the deep chill of the air. The faint tang of polish clings to your fingers even as you leave. Compline closes the day. You walk back to the dormitory in near darkness, the corridors lit only by the occasional candle in a wall sconce. Sliding under your blanket, you curl your cold hands against your chest. The smell of sage and leeks lingers faintly, and you hold on to it as though it might follow you into sleep. The bell wakes you before the dawn once again, its deep tone reverberating through the wooden beams above your head. The sound no longer startles you. It's simply the pivot around which your days turn. You swing your legs over the side of the cot, the floor so cold it feels like it could burn your skin. Around you, the other girls move like shadows, the quiet rustle of cloth, the only sign of life in the dim dormitory. The cloister walk is dark this morning, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth drifting in from the courtyard. Somewhere far away you hear the faint trickle of water from a downspout, the remnant of a light rain in the night. You step into the chapel's chill, the air still holding the faint scent of extinguished candles. The saints stare down from their niches, the flicker of the altar lights catching on their carved brows. Matins begins the chant as slow and steady as the tolling of the bell that woke you. Your voice slips into the rhythm without effort, the Latin syllables rolling from your tongue as if you've known them your whole life. The mistress glides along the line of novices, her gaze sharp but unreadable. You keep your eyes fixed on your psalter lips, moving in perfect time with the others. Lauds follow seamlessly, the psalms stretching like a long thread you can never see the end of. By the time it's done, the first pale light is seeping into the sky. In the refectory, breakfast is a crust of bread and a swallow of ale that leaves a faint sourness behind. The reading is from the rule this time about the necessity of absolute obedience. A true servant, the voice says, submits not only to just commands, but to all commands without question. You lower your gaze to your folded hands. The day's work begins in the kitchen. You're set to grinding coarse salt into fine grains, the pestle heavy in your hand. The grains crunch under the stone, the sound steady and relentless. When the salt is ready, you help chop onions for the noon meal, the sharp scent stinging your eyes until your vision blurs. You wipe them quickly on your sleeve, careful not to let the cook think you're slowing down. By mid-morning, you're called to the laundry yard. The water is cold enough to make your skin ache, and each garment feels heavier than the last as you lift it from the tub. You wring them with both hands, the muscles in your forearms burning, then hang them on the line where the wind immediately catches the damp cloth and snaps it in sharp bursts. The midday meal is turnip stew, thin but hot, served with a piece of dark rye bread. The reader's voice recounts the life of a saint who never left the walls of her convent. Her days a mirror of your own prayer, work, silence. You chew slowly, wondering if she ever dreamed of the world beyond the gates. This afternoon, you are sent to the scriptorium to begin ruling a fresh set of parchment sheets. You press the stylus lightly but firmly, marking out the lines that will hold the next psalter's text. The work is quiet and oddly calming, the faint scratch of the stylus the only sound around you. When the scribe passes by, he glances at your work and gives a short nod before moving on. Later, you're called to the garden to strip dried rosemary from its stems for the infirmary's stores. The scent is sharp, almost medicinal, and it lingers on your fingertips. You carry the bundle inside, handing it to the infirmarian, who thanks you with a small smile, a rare gesture in this place. Vespers arrives with the early evening. The chapel glows gold in the candlelight, shadows curling in the corners. The chant rises slow and steady, the voices weaving together into something that feels endless. Supper is lentil soup and bread eaten as a sister reads of a hermit who prayed so long he forgot the passing of the seasons. Before Compline, you are sent to clean the candelabra in the chapel. You run a cloth along the arms, the brass warming faintly under your touch. When you light them again, the flames bloom one by one, scattering the darkness just enough to make the space feel alive. Compline closes the day. You walk back to the dormitory through corridors thick with shadow, the candles in their sconces guttering faintly in the draft. Curling into your blanket, you still smell rosemary on your hands. You let the scent carry you towards sleep, imagining fields beyond these walls where it grows wild and free. The bell's slow, steady toll pulls you from sleep like a rope drawn from a well. You know its weight before you even open your eyes. The dormitory is dim, a pale wash of cold light leaking through the high windows, the air sharp and thin in your lungs. You slip from your cot without speaking, the wooden boards creaking under your feet as you dress. The other girls move as they always do, heads lowered, eyes half-lidded, mouths closed. There is nothing here to greet the morning except silence. The cloister walk is damp underfoot, the stones dark with last night's rain. A faint mist hangs low in the courtyard, clinging to your habit as you pass. The chapel swallows you in its shadowed stillness. The saints stand guard in their niches, the altar candles flickering in the draught that seeps through the door. Matins begins with its slow, measured chant, the voices rising together, like breath drawn in and out by one body. Your own voice slides into the familiar rhythm, each syllable fitting exactly into the space carved for utte by centuries of repetition. Lauds comes and goes, and the sky beyond the chapel windows shifts from gray to a washed-out silver. In the refectory, breakfast is bread and ale again, bread so dry it scratches your throat, ale that leaves a faint tang of wood from the cask. The reading is from the rule about perseverance. Let the monk's life be a daily martyrdom. The words settle on you like a weight you already carry. The morning's work is in the scriptorium. You are given a sheet of vellum and told to practice capital letters in red ink. The quill's tip must be held just so. Too much pressure, and the ink bleeds like spilled wine. You steady your hand, tracing each line slowly, the smell of the iron gall ink faint but metallic in the cool air. The scribe passes behind you, once glances at your work, and moves on without a word. That is as much praise as you'll get today. By mid-morning, you're sent to the kitchen to shell dried beans for the midday meal. The pods crack softly in your fingers, the beans clinking as they fall into the bowl. The warmth of the hearth is a welcome change from the scriptorium's chill, but you know better than to linger too close. As soon as the beans are shelled, You're told to fetch water from the well, the rope rasping in your hands as you draw the heavy bucket up from the dark. The midday meal is bean stew with a wedge of rye bread. The reader tells of a saint who slept on bare stone for decades, taking no comfort from bed or fire. You think of your own cot and its thin blanket, and how even that would seem a luxury to her. The afternoon's work is in the garden, clearing the last of the frost-bitten leaves from the herb beds. The air smells of damp soil and rosemary, stems the cold, biting through your sleeves until your fingers ache. You work in silence beside the infirmarian, who carefully digs out the roots of a dead plant, her breath clouding the air with each exhale. Later, you join the embroidery room to continue the border of gold thread on the altar cloth. The thread catches the dim light, bright as sunlight trapped in silk. You keep your stitches even careful not to pull the thread too tight. Across the table, a novice drops her thimble, the metallic ring startling in the hush. The mistress's gaze sweeps over her sharp and wordless. Vespers comes with the fading light, the chapel bathed in the gold of candle flame. The psalms move slow and deep, the chant sinking into the stone around you. Supper is carrot and barley soup, eaten under the low murmur of another saint's biography. Before Compline, you are sent to trim the wicks of the chapel candles. The blackened ends fall away under the small, curved scissors, the air rich with the scent of burnt tallow. You set fresh candles where needed, their wax cool and smooth under your fingers. Compline ends the day. You walk back through the cloister, the night air damp against your face, the courtyard swallowed in darkness. In the dormitory, you curl beneath your blanket, still smelling faintly of tallow and damp earth. You close your eyes and let the day dissolve into the quiet hum that fills every corner of this place, knowing the next will be its mirror. The bell's low toll rolls through the beams overhead, deep and steady, pulling you awake before your eyes even open. The air in the dormitory is damp and cold, the kind that settles into your bones. You push back the blanket and step onto the stone floor, its chill shooting straight through the soles of your feet. Around you, the other girls are already dressing in silence, the rustle of cloth, the only sound. The cloister walk is slick with a thin sheen of moisture, the stones shining faintly in the half-light. The sky above the courtyard is a pale, colorless gray, heavy with the promise of snow. Inside the chapel, the air smells faintly of smoke from the night's last embers. The saints stand motionless in their alcoves, their faces caught between shadow and candlelight. Matins begins the chant, low and deliberate, each note falling into place like a bead on a string. Your voice blends with the others until you can't tell where yours ends and theirs begins. Lauds follows the psalms, drawn out like a slow exhale. By the time it ends, a dim winter light leaks into the chapel through the narrow windows. In the refectory, breakfast is the same as yesterday's bread, with a crust hard enough to resist your teeth ale with a bitter edge. The reading today is from the Rule on Constancy. Do not tire of the work set before you, for the work itself is your offering. You bow your head over your folded hands. The morning's work is in the scriptorium. You're given the task of copying a short prayer in neat black ink onto a small scrap of vellum. The quill's tip scratches softly, each letter deliberate, the lines evenly spaced. When you finish, you hand it to the scribe. He glances at it, nods once, and sets it aside. By mid-morning, you're sent to the kitchen to grind barley into meal. The stone quern turns slowly under your hands, the grain crackling as it breaks. The air here is warmer, filled with the smell of wood smoke and the faint sweetness of grain dust. You carry the finished meal to the cook, who pours it into a great pot of boiling water for the midday porridge. The meal is barley porridge with a few shreds of carrot served with bread. The reader speaks of a saint who gave away every comfort she owned, living only for prayer. You think of the small pleasures you still cling to the smell of rosemary, the gold of candlelight, and wonder if they count as comforts here. The afternoon brings work in the laundry yard. The tub's water is near freezing, your fingers going numb almost instantly. You scrub a heavy woolen robe, the soap biting into your skin, and wring it out until your shoulders ache. The wind snaps at the wet cloth as you hang it on the line, droplets scattering like tiny beads of glass. Later, you are sent to the embroidery room to finish the gold border on the altar cloth. The thread gleams in the dim light, each stitch a tiny point of brightness. You keep your movements steady, your breathing slow. Across the room, a novice coughs into her sleeve. The mistress's gaze finds her sharp and silent. Vespers comes as the sky darkens to a muted blue. The chapel glows with its small constellation of candles, the chant rising and falling like a tide. Supper is thin lentil soup eaten under the steady voice of a reading about a hermit who died in her cell, her devotion unbroken to the last. Before Compline, you're tasked with tending the kitchen fire. You add logs carefully, listening to the low crackle as the flames take hold. The warmth touches your face and hands, seeping in just enough to make you reluctant to leave. But the bell calls you back to the chapel, its note cutting through the quiet. Compline is brief tonight, the prayers softer, the chanting slower. You return to the dormitory, through the dim corridors, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke. Curling under your blanket, you can still feel the fire's warmth lingering faintly in your palms. It's a small thing, but here, small things are everything. And now, as the last toll of the day's bell fades into the quiet, you let the rhythm of life within those walls begin to dissolve. The stone corridors, the damp air, the slow procession from prayer to work to prayer again, they soften into a kind of distant hum. You are no longer the child shivering at dawn, no longer the voice folded into the slow tide of chant. Instead, you drift upward past the cloister walk with its echoing footsteps, past the laundry lines snapping in the cold, past the candle-lit chapel where shadows cling to the saints. The smell of tallow and rosemary, of damp wool and fresh-cut leeks lingers faintly as you breathe slower, deeper. Those scents begin to fade too, like the last wisp of smoke from a snuffed candle. Your hands, so often stiff from cold and work, loosen now against the blanket. Your shoulders ease. The voices of the novices, once so carefully held in check, melt into the background until they are nothing more than a faraway murmur. The sound of the quill on vellum, the brush on flagstone, the rustle of fabric in the refectory, all become part of the same soft memory. You are no longer bound to the bell's toll. Time stretches here wider and slower than the rigid hours of the convent. The garden's herbs are always in bloom, the sun always warm on your face, the air always still. The world beyond the wall is no longer out of reach, it's simply there waiting. So you breathe in once more, long and even. Let the last scraps of candlelight fade from your mind, and feel yourself resting in a place beyond stone and silence. Here nothing is required of you. Here there is only warmth and quiet and sleep.